I'm your host, Will. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? Or, in this case, what happens when RobOCop meets the Terminator? The answer is not what you would expect, as we will go into detail the comic series RobOCop vs. Terminator. Let's get to it.
Come quietly or there will be trouble.
The comic book that I'm about to explore today is, without a doubt, one of the most controversial crossovers in the history of comic books. Yes, I am not exaggerating, because if you ever bring this up in front of a fan circle, people will beg you not to continue the discussion. Such is the reputation of Terminator RobOCop Kill Human. While I agree that the criticism is often a bit too harsh, I have to admit that the narrative commits some blasphemous sins to Alex Murphy's character, and any diehard RobOCop fan will find it annoying. However, what catches my attention is the fact that it manages to carve out one of the most gut-wrenching Terminator timelines ever conceived with an unexpected twist. In this video, I will bring you a detailed dive into this 4-issue comic series, where you will have everything from the Skynet threat to the cyborg protector who finds himself in a fight to save humanity. In order to understand how this controversial timeline came into existence, you have to jump back to 2011, when Dynamite Entertainment wanted to take a swing at mashing up these two popular sci-fi icons, Terminator and RobOCop. Unfortunately, the writer, Rob Williams, and artist, PJ Holden, failed to recreate Frank Miller's magical 1992 crossover, and their idea was to head into a darker and more cynical territory. I find it fascinating, because while it functions on its own standalone continuity, it also leans heavily on the established lore. The story picks up with RobOCop awakening in a desolate post-apocalyptic future where Skynet has already won. And throughout the narrative, you see him push to his psychological limits that shatter some of his prime directives. Nah, I think I've teased you enough with this one. Let me get straight into the thick of things. I love how the first issue opens up with a terrible crisis, and the narrative is premised years in the future, where the machines have completely taken over. The very first panel shows us the sheer brutality of this hostile world as a human survivor begs in vain for mercy and a ruthless Terminator kills him violently. The story then shifts on two other human survivors, Lauren and Taylor, who are a couple trying to run from the mechanized mayhem. The girl, named Lauren Amendola, narrates that she might just be the last woman alive, and the machines have wiped out humanity almost entirely. The resistance is gone, and the situation is so grim that it has been months since she or her partner Taylor heard from another human. As a last-ditch attempt, they had planned to sneak into a Skynet base and hack in to find a way to shut down the whole system. But it turned out to be too good to be true. As Lauren admits with disappointment, in this world, there are no good ideas left. Nevertheless, they do manage to break into the facility courtesy of Lauren's lockpicking skills. But the Terminator pursuit doesn't end well for Taylor, who is shot dead while trying to protect her just as she breaks in. Once inside, she realizes that it's a museum, and she is somewhat surprised to find out that Skynet has its own museum, where it preserves its family tree and technology. As Lauren looks through robot weaponry from the past, the Ed-209 from the RobOCop universe gets my attention. I immediately know that we are about to see RobOCop very soon, and then Lauren finds him inside a glass chamber. She breaks the lock to his chamber, but the Terminator is now almost about to attack her. In a dramatic twist, she ends up having the backing of the most effective cyborg protector, as RobOCop handles the threat and protects her. He mutters his trademark philosophy, protect and serve, and what follows next is a crazy shootout that sees RobOCop decimating the immediate Terminator threats. A confused Lauren asks RobOCop if he is one of them, and he only responds by saying that he is Murphy, which means that he hasn't completely lost his old identity. He asks her to stay behind him, and as they try to make a run for it against overwhelming numbers of Terminators, Lauren fills him in with all that has happened while he was inactive for years. Skynet computer system became self-aware and then decided to shut down its creators. And now, it has been generations since the Terminators have been slaughtering humans to the point of extinction. But the thing is, RobOCop is not exactly fast, and the Terminator forces soon catch up, resulting in another massive firefight. Meanwhile, Murphy tried something smart by connecting with a computer system to make the Terminator stand down. But even though it worked momentarily, it had a nasty consequence as well. You see, Skynet also managed to get into his system and change his directives enough to make him do the unthinkable. Just as he is explaining to Lauren about how Skynet thinks that she is the only human alive, he seems to be in an agonizing and conflicted state. He begs Skynet not to make him do this, but it doesn't work, and a puzzled Lauren stares in shock as he shoots her in the head. There you go, with the most dramatic ending imaginable for the first issue, where the Terminator eliminates the last surviving human on Earth. Of course, there has to be a twist in the upcoming issues, and I'm already sure that it will be redemption time for Murphy to undo the doom of humanity. The second issue opens up in a different timeline back in the past, and humans are still there, living normal lives in this timeline, as is evident from the first panel itself. We see a drug deal gone wrong, as a drug dealer is about to be killed by another because of something that he has taken or stolen from him. Of course, there is no forgiveness in this business, and the drug dealer is on the verge of getting shot. Suddenly, a time portal opens up, and the one who was about to shoot is ripped apart upon impact. The drug dealer watches in horror as RobOCop steps in through the time portal, and it becomes clear that he has gone back in time from the future. I quickly realize that this particular timeline, where RobOCop has stepped in, is the same as the Terminator 2 movie timeline. After warning the drug dealer against any practices that are against the law, RobOCop heads to Cyberdyne to intersect with John Connor, Sarah Connor, and the Terminator. He also reveals that he is here to stop something terrible from happening. He first comes up against the cops stationed at Cyberdyne, and he tries to handle things peacefully, suggesting that he is a cop from a different world and doesn't want to hurt anyone. However, he is interrupted by the Terminator, who starts to shoot at him with a minigun. I find this to be a defining moment for RobOCop, because when the cops duck for cover, he realizes that their mental strength has been torn to pieces. Meanwhile, a crucial flashback sequence reveals more about the situation as we see what RobOCop endured in the future. It is an agonizing panel where RobOCop desperately asks Skynet how many humans are still alive on planet Earth, and the response comes cold and definitively: none. RobOCop is unwilling to accept the answer, and he shows clear signs of frustration and emotions as he begs to differ, because he considers himself to be human, and that way, there is at least one human remaining. But Skynet responds with the same answer as before. RobOCop uses the Skynet mainframe to find out all there is to know about Earth's history since the late 20th century, and Skynet's history in particular, along with its tactical movements. He goes through the violent and gruesome history in a flash, and he even seems heartbroken by what he learns. His immediate reaction is that of grief and fury, as he shoots relentlessly at the robots, and then he uses the Skynet mainframe to learn about time travel and how to get out of this facility that holds him at the moment. But I was wondering about one thing that just didn't make any sense to me. Why was the Skynet mainframe helping RobOCop when the Terminators are still trying to stop him? The answer of the Skynet mainframe to this question is quite interesting, because it says that the Skynet system does not determine RobOCop as a threat. Well, okay, that does make sense, doesn't it? Because RobOCop isn't exactly human. Anyway, now we come back to the Terminator 2 timeline, where RobOCop has landed after what I can only assume is a successful time travel stint. Back at Cyberdyne, we get the first proper Terminator vs. RobOCop battle, where the former perceives RobOCop as someone who is trying to prevent him from getting John Connor out of there and saving him. As you may remember from the movie, the T-800 is played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was sent back by the Resistance to protect John Connor from the T-1000 sent to kill him. The fight between RobOCop and Terminator starts to get interesting, because they seem to be pretty evenly matched. But out of nowhere, RobOCop pulls a strange move. He shoots the Terminator with a dart-like thing that is some kind of weapon that specializes in taking down rogue Terminators. I thought this was a rather unexpected end to what could have been a way more iconic fight between the two. And then we see Sarah Connor and John Connor for the first time. Even young John Connor is confused about what RobOCop has done with Terminator. But strangely enough, the mother-son duo do not mind getting into a vehicle with RobOCop when he asks them to come with him if they want to live. Now, this is where the logical inconsistencies start to show up, and I will tell you why. Firstly, we never get a clear explanation of why the Connors are so trusting of RobOCop to begin with, because it's so easy to mistake him as some other hostile Terminator. Secondly, the journey soon takes a weird turn that doesn't add up to the earlier trust that they show in RobOCop. I will be very honest with you here. I was totally on board after the first issue that set up the whole apocalyptic world with the last human survivor as RobOCop is awakened after years of dormancy in the museum. However, The second issue makes things a bit weird with all the time traveling back to the timeline of the Terminator 2 movie. There are hardly any interactions with the T-800 before RobOCop engages him in such a fierce encounter, and I am definitely not a fan of how he uses the dart to immobilize him and wipe out his entire system. Also, meeting Sarah Connor and John Connor is such a fluke that I wonder how RobOCop would have planned for this. And the way they get into a vehicle with him right after he has immobilized the Terminator is baffling. Nevertheless, let me take you into the next bit so you can see all that happens after this time-traveling gig. The third issue opens with Murphy thinking about his family, and it's such a sudden turn from the usual narrative that I was left confused while reading. His visions take him back to a time when he was enjoying a vacation with his family. Then his son gets attacked by a shark, and it seems far too inconsequential. Next thing you know, he's jolted back to reality, and we see him driving a truck with John and Sarah by his side. There are some movie parallels that draw my attention here. For instance, the truck gets attacked by the T-1000 in the movie, and in line with those events, you will see that the T-1000 has hijacked a helicopter and prepared for the attack. In the movie, the T-800 is driving the truck, but here, it's RobOCop as he tries to steer John and Sarah Connor away. Suddenly, Sarah Connor tells RobOCop to pull over and points a gun at him. This is another thing that doesn't add up like I was telling you earlier. She just hopped into the truck willingly with her son moments ago, and with the T-1000 in pursuit, how is pulling over even an option? RobOCop doesn't take her threats seriously, even though Sarah Connor promises to blow up his head if he doesn't comply. I'm also amused to see John Connor in the back seat, mourning over the lifeless T-800. Why they carry the inactive Terminator inside the truck is beyond me, and John asks RobOCop what he did to the Terminator as it refuses to wake up. This is when RobOCop explains that he wants to alter the timeline. He is aware of everything that happens, as you all will know from the Terminator 2 movie events. Murphy knows that the T-800 helps him destroy the T-1000 in the steelworks, and then he is voluntarily lowered into molten metal to prevent any chance of misuse by Cyberdyne. Apparently, he's now convinced that the whole thing was a bad decision and it doesn't work. And it doesn't really matter if John Connor survives or not. It just delays the process. But the sentience of Skynet is still inevitable. RobOCop also reveals that humanity goes extinct in the distant future, and he explains his true purpose of coming back in time, which is to change things and stop Skynet forever. I know what you're thinking because that makes two of us. Where on earth is this story even going? Back to the story, RobOCop diverts from the original path, where they headed in the events of the movie, but the T-1000 is still after them and starts to shoot at the truck. RobOCop tries to assure Sarah Connor that it doesn't matter that he almost destroyed the T-800 because all that matters is the arm and the chip, which will dictate the events of the future. This is when Sarah Connor realizes that RobOCop is not at all like the T-800, and he doesn't care about the well-being of John Connor at all. After this realization hits her, she shoots him in the head, and the impact throws him out of the moving truck. The T-1000 is about to shoot at them, and they are pretty defenseless at this point, if you observe the situation. Suddenly, there is a blinding light that for some reason disturbs the visuals of an advanced Terminator like the T-1000. As it turns out, RobOCop had driven the truck into a route where there were several ED-209s, the fighting robots that often assist RobOCop in various stories. The ED-209s start firing back at the helicopter driven by the T-1000, and Sarah and John crash their truck. The next thing you know, they are surrounded by the ED-209s that tell them not to move. And this is when RobOCop reappears to do the explaining for us. He reveals that when he came back in time to stop Skynet from gaining sentience, he knew he wouldn't stop the T-1000 all by himself. So, in order to remedy this, he actually time-traveled 5 years before these events and contacted Dick Jones. If you don't remember Dick Jones, this is the corrupt OCP president from the RobOCop movie. As the ED-209s keep the T-1000 busy with all the shooting, RobOCop leads Sarah and John Connor into an OCP helicopter and head away to an aircraft carrier in the ocean. This is when the third issue ends, and I have to admit it's so far-fetched that I can hardly make sense of the motivations of the characters anymore. Whatever I have known about RobOCop tells me that he is programmed to be dutiful and protect humans. How does he not care about the life and well-being of John Connor? I did warn you that this is not your perfect comic book story, but trust me when I say that it's really entertaining because every single event in the narrative catches you off guard. The attempt to twist the Terminator 2 timeline is also quite amusing, and the whole Dick Jones reference only makes things interesting because it shows that RobOCop has actually pre-planned this more than you would think. Nevertheless, it is time for the fourth and final issue of this comic series, So let's find out how it all ends with so many plot strings scattered wildly at this point. Things start off at the aircraft carrier, and the T-800 has been brought here as well. Dick Jones assures RobOCop that there is no way that the T-1000 can invade a sealed space, and that they have the ship in the ocean. The security around the aircraft carrier is top-notch, and it's somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. The OCP UAVs, which are one of the most advanced and heavily weaponized fighter jets on the planet, are on constant patrol in this region. It is revealed that RobOCop time-traveled to the past and created omni-consumer products in order to fight Skynet, and he has had about 5 years of preparation time to this date. This is supposed to be his fight back and redemption after Skynet used him to kill the final human on Earth after taking control of his body against his will. Inside the ship, there is a completely sealed room, and Dick Jones informs him that the room can only be opened from the outside. The doors are extremely thick and strong, and there are no vents or gaps inside. Basically, once something is shot inside the room, there is no getting out. What I really find amusing here is the spin given to Dick Jones. From the RobOCop universe, we have all known him to be the corrupt CEO of OCP who was responsible for Murphy becoming RobOCop. Here, in this timeline, Dick is his best friend and a good man with dreams and ambitions. Also, there's a quick moment where Murphy tells himself that he has done all of this to fight Skynet in the memory of Lauren, the last surviving woman whom he killed. While RobOCop is still keen on destroying the hand and the chip, Dick Jones tries to convince him by suggesting the technological advancements that can be unearthed by reverse engineering the T-800. But RobOCop still wants an acid bath for all kind of Skynet technology so that it is completely destroyed. Meanwhile, John Connor is not happy about what they are doing to the T-800 because he maintains that it is good and there is no need for all this. You see, John is only a little kid here, so you can imagine his emotions against the cold-hearted actions of RobOCop. He shouts at Murphy saying, "You're not human," and this triggers him enough to slap John hard. Yes, this is yet another uncharacteristic RobOCop moment, isn't it? When have you ever seen him slapping civilians around? Of course, Sarah Connor is not too happy about Murphy hitting her son, and she warns him against touching him ever again. But all this is interrupted by some disturbing news. The T-1000 has escaped, and it is coming for John just like how it has been programmed. RobOCop has deduced that robots really don't like water, and this is why he had planned the whole thing on the Pacific Ocean. Suddenly, Sarah has a change of heart, and she comes and thanks Murphy for trying to stop Skynet and protecting John. To this, RobOCop once again affirms his position and clarifies that he is only trying to stop Skynet. And clearly, John Connor is not his concern. But the peaceful times have lasted too long, and now the T-1000 arrives in the most dramatic fashion. He makes an aircraft crash on board, and it's a really badass sequence, where he is shown jumping out of the front of the aircraft, ready to take on John Connor. It is way too strong for the security of OCP stationed on the ship, and the T-1000 slashes through all of them like carving cake. In order to deal with the crisis, RobOCop steps into the fight, but by now, the T-1000 has gotten inside some kind of giant mech suit. But the climactic moments have yet another twist, as the T-800 emerges as a savior. What seemed like a lifeless robot springs into action and blows away the T-1000's face. How it even comes to life after the dart that supposedly wiped out its entire CPU is beyond me, and the comic book narrative doesn't care to offer any explanations for this. Maybe the dart wasn't foolproof enough, or maybe it's just plot armor. It is just revealed that Dick Jones turned it on, but by now, Dick and John Connor are deeply in trouble. You see, they're inside the sealed room, and it's slowly filling up with water from the impact of the crashed aircraft on the ship. But all the preparation for 5 years amounts to precious little because the T-1000 still manages to slide into the sealed room by transforming into its liquid form and then regaining its shape once back inside. Sarah Connor pleads with RobOCop to go inside and save her son, but Murphy realizes that going in would jeopardize his mission of stopping Skynet permanently. He knows that there is no way for the T-1000 to get out of the sealed room, even though I'm left wondering why he cannot just get out the same way he got in. However, RobOCop has planned for acid to seep into the room eventually and disintegrate the Terminators. Anyway, that's how the story goes. And in the most shocking ending that I never expected, the T-1000 decapitates John Connor and they all sink underwater. RobOCop just mutters an apology as Sarah Connor looks on, and the door is sealed with Dick Jones, the T-1000, and the T-800 all trapped inside, along with the corpse of John Connor. The story ends on a bizarre note as RobOCop wonders if Skynet allowed him to travel back in time, knowing that he would end up being the reason for John Connor's death. He also thinks about the smile the T-1000 had as it stared at him from the sealed room as it started sinking. RobOCop takes some comfort from the fact that he feels disturbed by the smile, and robots cannot be disturbed, which means that he must have some human element in him. So yeah, that's the wrap on this, as RobOCop does this for Lauren, although there's no conclusive evidence to suggest that his sacrifice actually stops Skynet from taking over in the future. I did begin the video by admitting some major logical inconsistencies, and now that we are at the end of the whole story, you can probably understand why it faces so much criticism. If I keep the uniqueness of the plot and the most unexpected plot twist aside, this is not really a complete story, and there are so many questions that I am left with. While you might enjoy the constant dilemma of RobOCop as he fights with his human identity and his cyborg side, there is really no explanation for the way he acts and the way he disregards human life. The RobOCop I know would never allow a young boy to be killed as he watches. I would love to hear your take on this in the comments below. And also share your thoughts on where you would rank this story among some of the other popular RobOCop comics.